6 months had passed since humanity joined the Galactic Council, and life on Earth had changed in ways both subtle and profound. New trade agreements brought alien technologies to human markets, and Earth's colonies began expanding into their designated territory. Most people celebrated this new era of cooperation and possibility, but Dr. Helen Carter felt a growing sense of unease. She worked in a research lab aboard Earth Station 1, and her job was to study how human culture compared to other galactic civilizations. The Council had provided extensive historical archives as part of their welcome package, and Helen had spent months reviewing these documents with increasing concern. She requested a secure communication channel with Admiral Frank Bennett, who commanded Earth's United Fleet. Frank was a career military officer with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He had spent 40 years in various conflicts before Earth achieved global unity, and he understood strategy better than most. When his face appeared on Helen's screen, she wasted no time with pleasantries. She told him they had a serious problem and that the Council had been deceiving humanity through careful omission of crucial information. Frank leaned forward in his chair and asked Helen to explain what she had discovered. She pulled up charts and graphs showing military histories of every Council species going back thousands of years. The patterns were striking and deeply troubling. The Quarath had experienced only 3 major conflicts in their entire recorded history, spanning 12,000 years. The Xanthari had fought 7 wars total. The average Council species had maybe 4 to 6 significant conflicts before achieving space travel. Helen's hands trembled slightly as she highlighted these numbers. Frank studied the data with the practiced eye of a military analyst. He asked Helen to clarify what made these conflicts different from Earth's wars. She brought up another set of statistics that made the comparison stark and undeniable. The deadliest war in Quarath history had killed approximately 50,000 individuals over a period of 20 years. The Xanthari's worst conflict resulted in 200,000 casualties spread across 30 years of fighting. These were numbers that barely qualified as major battles by human standards. Helen then displayed Earth statistics and watched Frank's expression harden. World War I had killed 20 million people in just 4 years. World War II claimed between 70 and 85 million lives in 6 years. Those were only the 2 largest conflicts, and humanity had fought hundreds of major wars and thousands of smaller ones throughout recorded history. The math was staggering, and the implications were profound. Earth had been at war with itself for most of its existence, while other species had known mostly peace. Frank pointed out that being more violent was not necessarily an advantage, and asked what Helen was really suggesting. She shook her head and explained that violence was not the key factor. What mattered was innovation under pressure and adaptation through necessity. Every major technological breakthrough humanity achieved came from military requirements. Radar systems and rocket technology and nuclear power and computer systems and the internet and countless medical advances all emerged from warfare. Human civilization had been forced to innovate constantly just to survive. The Council species had developed their technology slowly and carefully through pure research over thousands of years. They had the luxury of time and peace to advance at a measured pace. Humanity never had that luxury, and instead learned to make quantum leaps in capability within single generations. Helen pulled up a comparison of technological development rates that showed humans advancing 10 times faster than the galactic average. The Council had noticed this but assumed it was temporary enthusiasm that would slow down once humans settled into the comfortable pace of galactic society. Helen leaned closer to the camera and told Frank that the Council fundamentally misunderstood what humanity represented. They thought Earth was just another Tier 4 civilization that needed a few centuries to mature and catch up. But humans were not like other species, and the Council had no framework for understanding what evolution through constant warfare created. She stated clearly that humanity was not Tier 4 or even Tier 3 in any meaningful sense. If the Council truly understood human history and capability, they would have assigned a very different classification. Frank asked the obvious question about whether Helen believed humans qualified as Tier 1. She paused and chose her words carefully. She told him that humanity might actually be beyond the Council's classification system entirely. Humans were not just another spacefaring species, but rather survivors who had clawed their way up from the edge of extinction multiple times. They were innovators who turned weapons into tools, and then tools back into weapons, and then weapons into starships. The human story was unique in the galaxy, and the Council had completely missed this reality. Frank was quiet for a long moment as he processed the implications. He finally asked what Helen thought would happen when the Council realized their mistake. She admitted she did not know, but suspected it would not be pleasant. The Council had built their entire power structure on assumptions about how species developed and what capabilities correlated with different advancement levels. Humanity broke all those assumptions, and the Council leaders would eventually figure that out. When they did, they would face a choice between acknowledging their error or trying to suppress the truth. Helen emphasized that humans needed to understand their true position before the Council made any decisions. Frank needed complete data on how humanity compared to Council species across every possible metric, not just military capability, but also innovation speed and cultural adaptability and strategic thinking and problem-solving approaches. She had already begun this analysis but needed more time and resources. Most importantly, they needed to keep this research classified until they understood the full picture. Frank agreed and told Helen to continue her work with maximum security protocols. He would allocate additional researchers and give her access to classified military databases. He wanted comparisons across every dimension of capability, and he wanted it done quickly. If Helen was right about humanity's true classification, then Earth needed to know before the Council figured it out. The geopolitical implications were enormous and could determine humanity's fate for centuries to come. Helen worked around the clock for the next 3 months, building a comprehensive analysis. What she found exceeded even her own expectations. Humans were not just moderately more advanced than their Tier 4 classification suggested. They were operating at levels that matched or exceeded current Tier 1 species in multiple categories. Human military doctrine was centuries ahead of Council thinking. Human innovation rates were unprecedented. Human cultural adaptability allowed them to thrive in conditions that would break other species. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. She prepared her final report and sent it to Frank with a simple message. Humanity was not Tier 4, and the Council had made a catastrophic error in judgment. The only question now was how Earth would respond when the truth became impossible to hide. The incident that changed everything happened in a region of space called the Outer Reach, where younger Council species maintained mining operations far from the central systems. Captain Greg Walsh was running a routine supply mission aboard his cargo vessel named the Phoenix, when his communications officer picked up a distress signal. Greg was a former Earth Navy officer who had retired from military service to haul freight between human colonies and Council stations. He had seen combat during the African conflicts and later served in the defense of Luna, stationed during the corporate wars. That experience had taught him to react quickly when lives were at stake. His navigator, Amy Stone, identified the source as a Korath mining station currently under attack by unknown vessels. Greg did not hesitate and ordered the Phoenix to change course immediately. Amy asked if they should contact Council authorities first, and Greg told her to send the alert, but keep moving toward the station. Standard Council protocol required civilian ships to report threats and wait for military response. Average response time in this sector was 8 to 10 hours depending on where patrol ships were currently stationed. Greg knew that mining station would not survive 8 hours. Billy Ross worked the tactical station and informed Greg that 3 hostile ships were circling the Korath station like predators. The attackers were frigate-class vessels probably operated by pirates who preyed on isolated outposts. The station's shields were failing and its defensive weapons had already been knocked offline. Billy counted approximately 70 Korath workers inside the facility, and their life signs were getting weaker as the station's systems failed. Greg studied the tactical display and made calculations based on years of combat experience. He ordered Amy to plot an intercept course at maximum speed and told Billy to charge their defensive weapons. Billy pointed out that the Phoenix was just a cargo hauler with 2 light turrets and basic shields. They were designed to scare off small raiders, not fight actual warships. Greg acknowledged this reality but noted they were the only help those miners would get in time. He had spent 10 years fighting against superior forces and had learned that tactics mattered more than firepower. The key was making the enemy react to you instead of the other way around. The Phoenix came in fast and hard, broadcasting a false transponder signal that identified them as a Council patrol vessel. The pirate ships broke off their attack on the station and turned to face this new threat. Greg used those precious seconds to position his ship near a dense asteroid field, where the larger pirate vessels would have trouble maneuvering. He ordered Billy to target the lead ship's engine section with everything they had. The pirates probably expected warning shots or attempts to negotiate, but Greg had no intention of playing by those rules. Billy's targeting was exceptional, and his shots tore into the pirate ship's rear quarter just as Greg threw the Phoenix into a violent spin. The cargo ship's reinforced hull sections caught return fire, but the shields held. Greg flew straight at the damaged pirate vessel and rammed it with the Phoenix's armored cargo bay. The impact sent both ships tumbling, but Greg had calculated the angles perfectly. The pirate frigate spun into an asteroid, while the Phoenix bounced clear with hull damage but intact systems. The second pirate ship moved to flank them, but Greg was already accelerating toward the mining drones that orbited the Quarath station. Amy understood his plan immediately and started calculating trajectories. The drones used long tether cables to move materials, and Greg intended to weaponize that infrastructure. He brought the Phoenix dangerously close to an active drone and fired his maneuvering thrusters at precisely the right moment. The wash from his engines hit the drone and sent its tether cable whipping through space like a massive razor wire. The cable caught the pursuing pirate ship across its forward section, and the results were devastating. The monofilament line, designed to handle tons of ore, sliced through the frigate's armor and disabled multiple systems. The pirate vessel went dark and began drifting as its crew scrambled to restore power. Greg did not give them time to recover and instead turned his attention to the third ship. This pirate captain had watched two partners get destroyed by a cargo hauler and decided that discretion was the better part of valor. The remaining hostile vessel powered up its faster-than-light drive and prepared to jump away. Billy locked weapons on the fleeing ship and asked if Greg wanted him to fire. Greg told him to take the shot if he could make it count. What happened next would be studied in military academies for years to come. Billy compensated for the enemy's acceleration and the Phoenix's own movement and the gravitational effects of nearby asteroids. He fired a burst that should have been impossible to land with cargo ship weapons. The shot struck the pirate vessel's drive section just as it was spooling up for the jump. The result was a catastrophic failure that left the ship dead in space. Council military vessels arrived 6 hours later expecting to find wreckage and bodies. Instead, they found the Phoenix heavily damaged but operational, with 3 pirate ships destroyed or disabled and 73 Quarath miners alive. The council officers were shocked and confused because nothing in their experience explained what had happened. Cargo vessels did not engage military craft, and civilian captains did not use advanced combat tactics. They took statements from Greg and his crew and inspected the battle site, trying to understand how this was possible. Ambassador Velrin personally traveled to the Phoenix while it was being repaired in a council shipyard. The Quarath diplomat wanted to thank the human captain who had saved so many of its people. Greg was in the medical bay recovering from injuries sustained when a bulkhead collapsed during the ramming maneuver. His ribs were cracked and he had a concussion, but he was alive and his crew was safe. Velrin entered the medical bay with all 4 arms positioned in a gesture that the translator indicated meant deep respect. The ambassador told Greg that the Quarath collective owed him a debt that could never be fully repaid. Greg shrugged carefully because his ribs still hurt. He said it was just the right thing to do and that he could not have lived with himself if he had waited while people died. Velrin pointed out that Greg had violated council protocol by engaging without backup. Standard procedure was to call for help and maintain a safe distance. Greg replied that those miners would have been dead long before help arrived, and he had the means to intervene, so he did. Velrin observed that the Phoenix was just a cargo ship, while the pirates had actual warships with military-grade weapons. Greg smiled and told the ambassador that the pirates were not expecting a cargo ship to fight back. Surprise was worth more than firepower most of the time, and anyway, the pirates had never faced anyone who fought like humans. Velrin processed this statement and realized something profound. The way this human talked about combat suggested an entirely different approach to warfare than anything the council understood. Ambassador Velrin returned to council headquarters deeply troubled by the conversation with Captain Greg Walsh. Something about the way the human spoke of combat and strategy suggested capabilities far beyond what the initial assessment had revealed. Velrin requested emergency access to Earth's complete military archives and what it found shook the foundations of everything the Council believed about galactic civilization. The data was overwhelming and painted a picture of humanity that was fundamentally different from any species the Council had ever encountered. Earth's military history was not just extensive but horrifying in its scope and intensity. The record showed wars fought with primitive weapons that somehow managed to kill millions of people. Velrin studied conflicts from human history and found strategies of total warfare where entire populations were mobilized for combat. There were sieges that lasted years and battles that consumed whole generations. Humans had developed tactics for every possible terrain, including deserts and jungles and mountains and oceans, and even the air itself. They fought in conditions that would kill most Council species. The weapons evolution was equally disturbing. Humans started with sharpened stones and wooden clubs, then progressed to metal swords and bows and early firearms. Within a few thousand years, they had created machine guns and tanks and aircraft and guided missiles. Then came nuclear weapons, which could destroy entire cities in seconds. Velrin found records of humans building enough nuclear warheads to exterminate all life on their planet, dozens of times over. This was not done as a desperate last resort, but as a strategic doctrine they called deterrence. What terrified Velrin most was not the weapons themselves, but the thinking behind them. Human military theory was sophisticated beyond anything the Council had developed. Velrin found texts on warfare dating back over 2,000 years written by strategists whose insights still applied to modern combat. One human named Sun Tzu had written about deception and misdirection and attacking where enemies were weakest. These concepts seemed obvious in hindsight, but Council militaries had only started exploring such ideas in the last 1,000 cycles. Humans had been writing about advanced strategy while still fighting with metal swords. Velrin discovered documentation of something humans called combined arms warfare, where they coordinated infantry and armor and aircraft and naval vessels in unified operations. They had mastered this concept before leaving their planet's surface. Council species typically developed single-domain expertise and only slowly learned to integrate different military branches over centuries. Humans seemed to naturally understand that warfare required coordinating multiple elements simultaneously. Their tactical flexibility was unprecedented. The more Velrin studied, the more alarmed it became. Humans prepared for scenarios that Council species would never consider. They had contingency plans for fighting enemies with superior technology. They trained officers to operate independently when cut off from command structures. They developed doctrines for asymmetric warfare, where smaller forces defeated larger ones through unconventional tactics. Most disturbing of all, they had plans for continuing to fight even if Earth itself was destroyed. They thought about losing their homeworld and still winning the war. Velrin called for an emergency session of the Council's highest-ranking members. Only representatives from the 3 Tier 1 civilizations were invited, because the information was too sensitive for general distribution. Councillor Thane of the Zenthari Empire arrived, first followed by Supreme Councillor Narix of the Morpheus Collective. These were beings who had guided galactic civilization for thousands of years, and who believed they had seen everything the universe could offer. Velrin was about to prove them wrong. The presentation began with images from human conflicts. Velrin showed footage of World War II with its tanks rolling across continents, and aircraft filling skies and cities burning under bombardment. The Council members watched in stunned silence as Velrin explained that this single war lasted 6 years and killed over 80 million humans. One war on one planet had caused more death than the entire military history of most Council species combined. Thane's scales rippled with distress, and its voice carried shock as it called the images barbaric. Velrin agreed the images were disturbing, but pointed out that this conflict happened over 300 cycles ago when humans were still primitive by galactic standards. The important lesson was not the violence itself, but what the violence revealed about human nature and capability. Velrin showed how humans had coordinated massive military operations across multiple continents simultaneously. They had developed logistics networks that supplied millions of soldiers in the field. They had created intelligence services that infiltrated enemy organizations. They had built entire economies around warfare production. The presentation continued with information about the human Cold War, where 2 nations built enough nuclear weapons to destroy their planet 50 times over. Supreme Councillor Narix pulsed with agitation, asking if humans had really risked their own extinction as a strategic policy. Velrin confirmed this and explained that the strategy worked because both sides understood that using the weapons meant mutual annihilation. The fear of total destruction kept the peace and forced both nations to compete through proxy conflicts and technological advancement instead of direct warfare. Velrin highlighted what humans accomplished during those 40 years of Cold War competition. They went from primitive computers to global information networks. They advanced from basic rockets to landing people on their moon. They developed precision-guided weapons and stealth technology and satellite systems. Two human nations competing against each other had driven more innovation than most council species achieved in 1,000 years. The pressure of potential conflict had forced rapid advancement across every field of science, and engineering counselor Thane demanded to know why the assessment teams had not discovered this information during humanity's initial evaluation. Velrin explained that humans had provided all requested data honestly and completely. The problem was that assessment teams looked for standard technological markers and current military capability. They measured what humans had at that moment, not what humans had survived or what their history revealed about their nature. The teams had asked the wrong questions and made assumptions based on experience with other species. Supreme Counselor Narix asked what Velrin was proposing. The ambassador stated clearly that humanity needed to be reclassified immediately. They were not Tier 4 and probably not even Tier 3. Based on strategic capability and tactical innovation and their demonstrated ability to fight against superior forces, Velrin believed humans qualified as Tier 2 at minimum and possibly Tier 1. The chamber erupted in protest at this suggestion. Thane rose from its seat, arguing that humans had been spacefaring for less than one cycle and had explored barely a dozen star systems. They lacked energy weapons and quantum shields and gravitational manipulation technology. Velrin waited for the protest to subside, then asked how the council explained Captain Greg Walsh defeating 3 pirate warships with a minimally armed cargo vessel. The chamber fell silent as the council members considered this question. Velrin pressed the point by noting that Walsh had used tactics taught in advanced council military academies. He had improvised solutions in real time that would take trained council officers days of planning to develop. And Walsh was not even a current military officer, but a retired veteran working as a civilian merchant captain. Velrin displayed a final image showing human fleet deployment patterns and strategic doctrines. If civilian captains could fight at this level, what could actual human military forces accomplish? Velrin had reviewed Earth United fleet training programs and found they prepared officers for scenarios the Council would consider impossible. Human commanders trained to fight enemies with better technology. They studied how to win battles when outnumbered. They developed contingency plans that assumed the worst possible circumstances and prepared responses for each scenario. The presentation ended with a simple statement. The Council had encountered many species over 12,000 cycles, but had never met one that evolved through constant warfare. They did not understand what that created or what it meant. 3 months after the Phoenix incident, Admiral Frank Bennett received an official communication from the Galactic Council requesting his immediate presence for an emergency session. The message was formal and urgent in a way that suggested something significant had changed. Frank decided to bring Dr. Helen Carter with him because her research into Council species and human capabilities would be essential for whatever conversation was coming. They boarded a fast diplomatic shuttle and made the journey to Council headquarters in less than a week. The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council was designed to impress visitors. With its massive scale and architectural beauty, seats rose in circular tiers around a central platform where speakers addressed the assembly. The ceiling stretched high above and seemed to capture light from distant stars. Frank had seen impressive buildings before during his 4 decades of military service. He had stood in the Situation Room during planetary crises and walked the corridors of power on Earth. Architecture did not intimidate him, and neither did ancient alien civilizations. Ambassador Velrin approached as Frank, and Helen entered the main hall. The Korath diplomats' forearms moved in greeting gestures that the translator rendered as respectful welcome. Velrin thanked them for coming so quickly and explained that the matter was urgent and sensitive. The ambassador led them to a private chamber adjacent to the main hall where the 3 supreme counselors waited. Frank noted the security measures and the absence of other species representatives. Whatever this meeting was about, the council wanted it kept quiet. Supreme Counselor Narek spoke first, and its crystalline form pulsed with colors that the translator indicated meant seriousness and concern. The Morpheus Collective representative stated plainly that the council had made an error in their initial assessment of humanity. They had reviewed additional data and determined that the Tier 4 classification was incorrect. Based on new analysis, humanity needed to be reclassified immediately. Frank kept his expression neutral and said nothing. He wanted to hear what the council would admit before revealing what he already knew. Counselor Thane of the Zenthari Empire continued the explanation. The reptilian being scales caught the light as it described how the council had focused on current technology rather than historical capability and strategic thinking. They had measured human weapons and ships against standard metrics, but failed to understand what human history revealed about adaptability and innovation under pressure. The Phoenix incident had forced them to look deeper, and what they found changed their understanding of what humanity represented. Frank glanced at Helen, and she gave him a slight nod. This was the moment they had been waiting for since her research began. The council was admitting their mistake, which said important things about their character and intentions. Frank asked directly what tier the council now believed humans qualified for. Velrin answered that based on strategic capability and tactical innovation and demonstrated combat, effectiveness humanity should be classified as Tier 1. Full council, membership with voting rights and expanded territory and military privileges would follow this reclassification. Helen spoke up asking what specific criteria led to this conclusion. Thane responded that Captain Greg Walsh had demonstrated strategic thinking that matched or exceeded what council military academies taught their best officers. The way Walsh had improvised tactics and used his environment as a weapon and defeated superior forces showed a level of combat capability that the council had never encountered in a species so young. Further research into human military history revealed that Walsh was not exceptional among humans, but rather representative of how humans approached conflict and problem-solving. Frank allowed himself a small smile and said that Greg was indeed a good officer but not unique. Earth had thousands of captains and commanders with similar training and experience. The United Fleet selected officers based on their ability to think creatively under pressure and to win fights against superior enemies. That was just standard human military doctrine developed over thousands of years of warfare. The council representatives exchanged glances that suggested this information was both expected and disturbing. Supreme Counselor Narek asked if humanity would accept Tier 1 classification. Frank said that acceptance depended on conditions because Earth did not enter agreements without understanding the full terms. He wanted complete access to council archives, including historical records and strategic databases and technological libraries. Humanity needed to understand the galaxy they were now part of, and all the factors that shaped current political realities. He also wanted assurances that Earth's sovereignty would be respected. Humans would follow council law, but Earth and its colonies remained independent. Helen added that humanity wanted a seat on the Security Council, which made decisions about military threats and responses. If humans were being recognized as a military power, then they needed to participate in security decisions. The three Supreme Counselors conferred silently through whatever communication method their species used. After a moment, Thane nodded and agreed to all conditions. Humanity would have full representation on every major council body, including the Security Council. Full access to archives and databases would be granted within one cycle. Frank stood and extended his hand toward Velrin, who had learned about human handshake customs during previous meetings. The ambassador reached out one of its four hands and they shook on the agreement. As they did, Narek asked a question that had clearly been bothering the council leadership. The Supreme Counselor wanted to know if humanity had deliberately concealed their true capabilities during the initial assessment. Had humans intentionally misled the council? About their advancement level, Frank's smile widened slightly as he explained that humans had answered all questions honestly and provided complete data as requested. The problem was not human deception but council assumptions. The assessment teams had looked at civilian technology because that was what humans showed them. Military technology was several generations more advanced, but the council never asked to see it. Frank compared it to showing someone the horizon and letting them assume that was all that existed. The horizon was just the limit of vision, not the limit of reality. Velryn spoke quietly and said the name Sun Tzu, followed by a quote about appearing weak when strong. Frank nodded appreciatively and said the ambassador was beginning to understand. Humans were not trying to conquer the galaxy and had no interest in military domination. But humanity had not survived 10,000 years of warfare by showing all their capabilities immediately. Humans played long-term strategies and thought in terms of centuries rather than decades. They prepared for scenarios others had not considered, and they never stopped planning for every possible contingency. The formal announcement came 3 days later. Humanity was reclassified as Tier 1, making them the 4th species to achieve this status in Council history, and by far the youngest. The news sent shockwaves through the galactic community as 47 species tried to understand what this meant. Some welcomed humanity as fresh energy in an ancient system, while others worried about what a warrior species might bring to galactic politics. But every species understood one fundamental truth after the announcement. Humanity was not just another civilization that had reached the stars through technological progress. They were survivors who had fought themselves to the edge of extinction multiple times and chosen cooperation over continued conflict. They had turned the hard lessons of warfare into strengths that made them formidable partners and dangerous enemies. The galaxy had seen species rise through economic power and technological advancement and careful diplomacy over thousands of years. But humanity was the first to reach Tier 1 through determination and strategic thinking, and the wisdom earned from surviving their own violent nature. The moment aliens learned humanity was the first force in the galaxy was not when they saw human weapons or ships. It was when they realized humans had already won the hardest war possible, which was the war against themselves. And if humans could do that, then the galaxy was about to discover what else they were capable of achieving.